Hello everybody, hope you guys are enjoying your day. Today we're going to be looking at potential tropical storm Fay, which is going to be impacting parts of the southeast, the mid-Atlantic, and the northeast with some gusty winds and some heavy rainfall over the next couple of days. We're going to be tracking that storm with you guys, as well as tropical storm Christina and potential hurricane Christina, which would be our first hurricane of this hurricane season for parts of the Central Pacific, the Eastern Pacific, or the Atlantic. That would be your first hurricane in any of those basins. We also are going to be going over my personal storm track forecast, my personal hurricane intensity forecast, and my own wind and rainfall forecast for this, and that'll give you kind of a very good insight on what I think the storm is really going to impact you guys with in terms of your impacts from the storm. Now, also one more thing I have to note: I am making my fall forecast, and that will be published on July 10th, and then my winter forecast will be published on July 15th. So make sure you have your notifications on so that you don't miss when I do upload that. So here is your current National Weather Service page, and we do have quite a bit of heat advisories over much of the United States. We'll go from east to west this time. Flood watches for parts of southeastern New Hampshire, as well as a couple of heat advisories underneath those. Now we have some heat advisories for parts of upstate New York and parts of Vermont there, and then we have some for parts right around Detroit and Michigan, and then also we have some heat advisories for parts of Wisconsin, Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, and Minnesota, and then around Minneapolis you have some excessive heat warnings because of those heat indices, which could be around 105 degrees or so. We also have some scattered heat advisories that are scattered across parts of Kansas, New Mexico, and also parts of Texas. We have excessive heat warnings in effect for parts of southern Nevada, southern California, and southern parts of Arizona. And then we have some red flag warnings for parts of Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona, as well as a couple of wind advisories and high wind watches and warnings over parts of northern and northeastern Montana. So here's your current 5-day graphical outlook from the National Hurricane Center, and then we're going to start looking at potential tropical storm Fay. Now we have Invest 98L. This is the system that could potentially turn into tropical storm Fay, and we have a 60% chance of development within the next 48 hours, and within the next 5 days we have a 70% chance of development. Now here's your chances for these two disturbances. We have Invest 96E there, which has a 30% chance of development within the next 48 hours, and within the next 5 days we have a 40% chance of development. For that disturbance east of tropical storm Christina there, we have a near 0% chance of development within the next 48 hours and a 40% chance within the next 5 days. Now here is your 5-day graphical outlook for the Central Pacific, and just south of Hawaii, we have within the next 48 hours, we have a 10% chance of development, and within the next 5 days, we have a 10% chance of development as well. So here is where current Invest 98L or potential tropical storm Fay is, and it's in northeastern South Carolina. And probably this was a snapshot of about a couple hours before I'm making this, before I'm currently making this video. So this was about 2 hours ago. So this is most likely already on shore. We're coming onto the ocean now, and that would help it strengthen. And as you get it onto the ocean, we have some very, very warm waters that are off the coast, especially until you hit about Virginia and Delaware. You still have some very conducive waters for some tropical development, and especially within this whole area, that is very conducive of some tropical development. And we are going to see this system ride throughout these areas, and that could help it rapidly strengthen into some sort of very, very big storm. So, or at least some sort of tropical storm, or maybe a high-end tropical depression if it's a little bit weaker. Now here's your model track guidance from the main models, and you see most of them have it clipping parts of the North Carolina coastline, especially the Outer Banks, and then it starts to head just east of parts of Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and it clips parts of eastern Long Island, then moves through eastern Connecticut, much of Rhode Island, and into eastern Massachusetts, southeastern New Hampshire, and into eastern Maine there, and then it starts to take a eastward curve to parts of eastern and southeastern parts of Canada there. So That is generally your storm track, and here is your GEFS storm tracks, your GFS ensemble models. This is the American models. The GEFS and the Canadian models, especially the European models, have been further to the west, closer to the shore than most of the main model guidance. But that's something that we definitely have to look at, and we'll definitely have to solve that within the next coming days to see how close to land this will get, especially if it's just offshore, but it is close enough to land where it could potentially bring some of those gusty winds. That's where you would see the maximum impacts out of this storm. Now, here is your GEPS storm tracks, and this is your Canadian ensemble models, kind of all over the place. You have some of them going onshore, some of them kind of veering further east where it wouldn't have too much of an impact. Right now, the Canadian models aren't too big of a factor into my forecast. They're not too reliable at the moment. Here is your intensity guidance from these main models, and you see about I would say about 50 to maybe even 60% of them have it into some sort of tropical storm. I believe about 6 of them out of the 9 models or so, or the 10 models, have this as some sort of tropical storm at one point or another. So that would give you about a 60 or 70% chance of seeing some sort of tropical storm out of this event. Now, here is my personal storm track forecast for this. Now, it is currently, as of the latest, the latest surface plot, it is over eastern South Carolina. So that is where I place the low pressure system. Currently, it's probably just a couple miles east of land right now, so it's probably over the ocean right now. But I just used the latest surface plot data. It's gonna move up the East Coast, probably just east of the Carolinas and Virginia, and then it's gonna make pretty much a straight north turn, and that's where it's gonna potentially have landfall impacts for parts of Long Island, Connecticut, of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. This is where the center of the low pressure could go. This isn't where the impacts are going to go. In fact, the impacts of this are going to be widespread throughout parts of the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and parts of the Southeast, which you'll see in the maps coming up. Now, this is your 5-day forecast, so this is going from today, the 8th of July, all the way until the 13th of July. So here's my personal intensity guidance or intensity map, and this is for me personally. I think this will be a middle to low end tropical storm. Probably by about the next 2 days or so, it's gonna strengthen into some sort of tropical storm, and then it's gonna really hit its peak within the next 3 days, and then by the fourth day and the 96th hour, probably to about 120 hours, 4 to 5 day time frame, that's when it's gonna start to die down, probably into some sort of high end tropical depression or a middle level tropical depression. Now, here is your wind forecast, and this is my personal wind forecast. Now, we're going to start off with your first layer. This is your 1 to 10 mile per hour area, and pretty much the entire eastern seaboard, seeing that pretty much all these states that border the Atlantic Ocean are going to see some sort of 1 to 10 mile per hour impacts out of this. This is just where it's going to be generally a nice breeze, but nothing too impactful. Here's your 10 to 20 mile per hour region, and you see that's a little bit further or a little bit closer to the ocean, but still fairly far inland, reaching into those 10 to 20 mile per hour regions. And then here's your 20 to 30 mile per hour regions. This is mainly confined to parts of eastern South and North Carolina, as well as eastern Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, eastern Pennsylvania, and then into parts of the much of the rest of the Northeast there. Now, here's your 30 to 45 mile per hour region. This is your maximum sustained wind gusts out of this. So this is a wind gust, not a sustained wind. Sustained winds will probably be about 10 to 15 mile per hour, mile per hours slower or weaker than this. So if you're in, let's say, this 30 to 45 mile per hour area, your sustained winds will probably be between 15 and 20 miles per hour at the peak of this system. Now, 30 to 45 miles per hour, probably on the lower end of that, probably around 30 to 35 miles per hour in terms of your maximum wind gusts, and that's for parts of just clipping eastern North Carolina, eastern Virginia, parts of Maryland and Delaware, as well as eastern parts of New Jersey, all of Long Island through eastern Connecticut, much of Rhode Island, and southeastern Massachusetts. They're seeing 30 to 45 mile per hour wind speeds at the peak of this storm. And again, this is going for your next 5 days. Now, here is my rainfall forecast, and again, this is also going for the next 5 days. Now we have under an inch here. This is the first layer here, and this is over much of parts of the coastal southeast as well as parts of the mid-Atlantic and pretty much all of the northeast. They are seeing under an inch of rainfall out of this system. Now here's your 1 to 2 inch region, and this is over parts of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, moving all the way up the east coast into parts of the northeast. They're seeing 1 to 2 inches, and then here's your 2 to 3 inch region, and that is strictly confined to parts of the northeast. And I was considering putting this out also for parts of the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and I didn't put it there, but definitely you could near 2 inches of rainfall if you do live over the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So do keep that in mind. But I just didn't put it on this map because it would be such a small little area, and also it would probably be on the lower end of that, probably 2 or maybe 2.25 inches or so. But for the parts of the northeast, you could potentially see 3 inches, and I didn't want to put a 3 to 5 inch region because I think that would be a little bit too much. But locally, you could see maybe 3.5 inches of rainfall out of this, mainly for parts of eastern New England. That's where the bullseye of this rainfall would probably be. Now, we're going to quickly talk about the Eastern Pacific, and then I'm going to just wrap up this video. Now here's currently where CRISTINA is, and it's currently off the southwestern part of Mexico there. Now this is at about 107 degrees west and 14 degrees north or so. Now here's the current track from the National Hurricane Center, and they're putting this as a tropical storm, but then within the next about 24 hours it should strengthen into a hurricane, and then it'll stay as a hurricane all the way until about Friday, late at night on Friday. That's when it should strengthen down to or weaken into some sort of tropical storm, and then that's when you're getting far enough out where it's still a little bit uncertain there. And this also has the potential to impact parts of Hawaii, so that is something very significant. Now here is the current model track guidance. Here's your main models for this, and you see most of them going northward a little bit, going northwestward for a little bit, and then it's going straight westward. And if this frame were to go a little bit further west, you would start to see Hawaii pop into that frame. Now here is your wind speed probabilities out of this, and you're seeing we have about a 90 to 100% chance of seeing tropical storm force wind speeds. In fact, it is already a tropical storm, but you see that does extend fairly far north and west. That is indicating that they have fairly high confidence that this should stay at least above tropical storm force strength over the next couple of days. Now here is your hurricane force wind speed probabilities, and they're showing a 30 to 40% chance. I think this should be probably a 60 or 70% chance because of most of the model guidance showing it is probably going to be some sort of category 1, maybe even a category 2, or on the high end of things, maybe a category 3 hurricane. Now, here is that model guidance. Tropical storm currently, but pretty much all these models bring it, except for about 3 models or so, bring this to a category 1 at least, most of them a middle end category 1, and one of these models on the higher end of things, this is the COTI model. This is also the model that was the first model to bring Hurricane Dorian last year to a category 5, so something that it's a fairly unreliable model, but every once in a while it will get something right. So don't leave it out of the picture or out of the question that you could see maybe a high-end category 2, maybe a low-end category 3. Right now, not looking too likely, but we could see that potentially most of the models bring this to a middle to high-end or category 1 here. So here's your GEPS tracks for this as well, and this is your Canadian ensemble models, and you see this one actually shows Hawaii, and you can see most of these models that go out far enough do hit parts of northern Hawaii there. Now here's your model intensity guidance for Invest 96E, which is the other Invest in the Eastern Pacific currently, and most of these models don't have this as a tropical storm, but a couple of these models want to skyrocket it into some sort of tropical storm. Not looking too likely right now, but definitely also not out of the question or not impossible to happen currently. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Please consider subscribing, leaving a like, and turning on notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.